Unit 8, Lesson 3, Developing Learning Objectives. This is Step 5 in the PBL process. In this lesson, we will look at an overview of the purpose of learning objectives, identify what is a learning objective. We will explain Bloom's taxonomy, which classifies different types of learning objectives, and we will give some tips for developing learning objectives. Overview. Learning objectives are developed to provide you with an understanding of what is to be accomplished in the self-study stage. This is done at the end of the opening stage and prior to the self-study stage in problem-based learning, so the learners have a clear idea of what is required of them during this period. Traditionally, when you do a course, the tutor develops the learning objectives and presents them to you at the start of the course or a module. However, in problem-based learning, due to the diverse nature of problems, the learner is responsible for developing their own learning objectives together with the facilitator. This provides a learning in itself, as it provides a model so that the learners can write their own learning objectives and helps develop an important lifelong learning skill, the setting of objectives. An overview of what is a learning objective. A learning objective describes what you will know or will be able to do once the period of self-study is over. For example, the learner will be able to develop a forecasting tool to allow the company to predict future sales. By specifying learning objectives, it guides you and keeps you focused on what you're required to achieve throughout the stage. It allows you to set priorities of what has to be done. It also provides you with a means to allow you to self-assess yourself during the period of self-study. For example, you might examine, have you achieved the objectives you set out to do? It's important that learning objectives are clearly stated, they can be clearly measured, they're realistic and doable, and it's something worthy of being done or completed. Bloom's taxonomy. Benjamin Bloom provides the most comprehensive guide to writing learning objectives, and his taxonomy is widely used in higher education. He states there are 6 levels of knowledge in the cognitive domain, which is the knowing domain. The first level is knowledge. This is the basic recall or remembering of information. The verbs associated would be define, repeat, record, name. A sample learning objective in the context of the problems we've discussed would be name the different types of forecasting techniques. Comprehension. This goes one step further. Rather than just recalling or naming, the student must be able to explain ideas or concepts. Verbs associated with this might be translate, discuss, describe, express, identify. A sample learning objective might be explain what is meant by time series forecasting. Application. This goes another stage in which the student must be able to use the knowledge. So they must apply, employ, use, or demonstrate. An example of a learning objective might be apply the relevant techniques to calculate the accuracy of your forecast. Analysis. It requires the learner to be able to break the component into parts or the problem into parts and distinguish between their parts and the relationship. Verbs associated might be compare, contrast, criticize, debate, question, solve, examine. 2 learning objectives which give an example of this level of learning are distinguish between the different forecasting methods and examine which methods are appropriate for your organisation. So in the context of forecasting, there might be 3 or 4 different methods, and you might need to analyse these in the context of the needs of your organisation and which is most important. Synthesis. The student must be able to create something new, for example, a new product or process. Examples of verbs associated with this level of learning are design, arrange, formulate, organise, manage, prepare, plan, propose. An example of a learning objective might be design an Excel spreadsheet to calculate the forecast for the next 6 months for your organisation. Information then is the highest level. The student must be able to justify their reasoning for making a decision or choosing between different ideas. Judge, appraise, evaluate, rate, compare, estimate are all verbs associated with this level of learning. Two examples of learning approaches might be evaluate the different forecasting approaches and explain your preferred method. When you're writing your learning objectives, you might consider at what stage of the taxonomy your learning objectives are at. It's expected most of the learning objectives will probably be at the higher levels. For writing learning objectives, it's important that you begin each learning outcome with an action verb. For example, apply the relevant techniques to calculate the accuracy of your forecast. It's important you use only one verb per learning outcome, so the learner is clear of what they have to complete. It's important that you avoid vague terms like know or be familiar with or be exposed to. It must be very definite. It's important to avoid complicated sentences and, if necessary, to use more than one sentence to ensure clarity. Outcomes must be observable and measurable and clear that they have been completed or not. You also must bear in mind the timescale in which the outcomes are to be achieved. In this module, self-study will take place over a 3-week period, so you must be capable of completing these learning objectives throughout that period. Furthermore, once the learning objectives have been developed, they must be assigned to an individual. The discussion leader or facilitator must finish the meeting clarifying that all learners are clear of what they need to achieve during the self-study period. In the next unit, Unit 9, we will look at self-study. This is step 6 of the PBL process.